it's me. Shame and scandal in the family. Whoa.
Good afternoon from Mickey and from me from Castle Goring. I was rather hoping that we could have the WAPs with us, but I'm afraid not, because they are fast asleep, and I don't believe in disturbing babies when they're sleeping. Although, of course, as my mother used to say every time any infant came on the scene, she would say, now make sure you make as much noise as possible, because the one thing you don't want to be is a prisoner to quietness. And if you don't make as much noise as possible with children, they grow up expecting to sleep in quiet. While if you make as much noise as possible, they will grow up used to noise and they will sleep no matter what, which I have to say was wonderful advice. But later on, we are going to be speaking to Gary Dodds. His name is actually Robert Gary Dodds, but everybody calls him Gary, who has written a dual biography on the two Alexander Hamiltons. Americans, of course, will know who Alexander Hamilton is, as he's one of the founders of the American Republic. And his latter-day namesake, who died 3 years ago, and who was the elder brother of a boyfriend of mine from before I got married. And last night, I was at the book launch, which was really a wonderful book launch. But I will save that because Gary is en route here and he's a little bit delayed, but that's okay because he is over from America for only a few days and he's got a chock-a-block program. So without further ado, I will plunge in. Lorena Taft says, I for one am disgusted with Charles and the British monarchy. They were aware of the anti-monarchy sentiments in Jamaica. Yet they sent in William and Catherine like sacrificial lambs. Charles either doesn't know better or doesn't care. Both attitudes are dangerous for William. Harry isn't the only problem in the royal family. Oh dear. Oh dearie me, oh dearie me. Well, Lorena Taft, I think that's a little bit harsh, and I cannot entirely agree with you, because I know as a fact, because remember, I'm Jamaican, and one of my cousins, his name is Dan Williams. Well, in the family we call him Dan. In Jamaica they call him Danny Williams, and his correct name is the Honourable Danvers Williams. And I think he's been given the Order of Jamaica, so he's pretty eminent in Jamaica. He was a minister in the PNP government, and that's Mummy's cousin, first cousin. And Daddy's first cousin, once removed, Turo, Arthur Ziadie, was in the JLP government. And I hasten to add that I have been on the telephone and beating the bongo drums and the bush telegraph to find out what has been going on. I hasten to add, I have not spoken to any of my cousins who were in any government in Jamaica, nor, since people know that I'm friendly with the High Commissioner of Jamaica in the United Kingdom, nor have I spoken to him about this. It is imperative that I protect people I am related to and fond of or friendly with. Because this is a political hot potato. But I obviously have loads of connections in Jamaica, and there's nothing effectively that I can't find out if I need to find out. And I hope I'm not blowing my trumpet, but just making it clear that I don't need to compromise the High Commissioner or my cousins to be able to provide you with accurate information as to what really has happened and why it has happened. That's really important to establish. Everybody tells me that nobody expected the dynamite situation that arose in Jamaica. They have been completely wrong-footed. Everybody has been wrong-footed by it. Nobody expected it. Had Lisa Hannah not precipitated the whole drama with her calculated, in my opinion, snub, it is possible that the visit would have gone off in a much quieter, less controversial manner. Once she did that, the onus was then on everybody having to protect their own personal or political interests. So she started the ball a-rolling, and my goodness, has it not gathered muck as it has hurtled down the mountainside. Charles cannot have known, nor anybody else, that Catherine and William were going to be effectively sacrificial lambs. My understanding is that Andrew Holness, who is the Prime Minister of Jamaica, and who some of you might remember in the run-up to the election, I was asked to do a video and did a video in support of his being elected Prime Minister of Jamaica. Had Lisa Hannah not done what she did, he would doubtless have had a more decorous and less controversial greeting speech. As it is, he tried to make it as anodyne as possible without slitting his political throat locally. Because just as how Lisa Hannah's first duty is to herself and her party, his first duty is to the Jamaican people and his party. The whole thing has been a huge embarrassment to people in Jamaica. The average Jamaican person is not anti-monarchist. There is a deserved debate as to whether Jamaica should ever remain a monarchy or become a republic. And this is a debate that has been going on for years. And I have to tell you, as a Jamaican, I can well see the merit of Jamaica being a republic within the Commonwealth and having a Jamaican born or Jamaican citizen as a head of state. I can see all of that. It's not that big a deal one way or the other. Where it becomes material is that as long as the Queen is head of state, the British judiciary becomes the ultimate arbiter in terms of certain legal matters. This falls away when Jamaica is a republic. At the moment, Jamaicans can appeal to the Privy Council, the House of Lords. I don't know what it's called nowadays because they keep on changing the names, but it used to be the House of Lords, that you could appeal to the judges in the House of Lords. So this will fall away, and this will possibly be dangerous for the Jamaican people who at the moment are assured of an incorruptible and uncorrupted final arbiter of a lawsuit or a trial, a criminal case. So that is really important. And there are people on both sides of the political divide in Jamaica who really do not want to see Jamaica become a republic for this particular reason. They don't mind if Jamaica remains a monarchy, but they can't basically say it publicly because it's all tied up with race, with history, with the misconceptions of history, the misconceptions of to what extent the British Empire was a force for good as opposed to evil. It's a debate that has been very hotly entered into by people who wish to change Jamaica from, and have succeeded to a large extent, from a multiracial, multicultural society, a society where the identity of the country is no longer multicolored, because Jamaica's national motto is out of many one people, but is basically a black country. So there are all sorts of issues going on here that have made it impossible for most moderates are being forced into the position of silence. And, you know, more than one person on both sides of the political divide said to me, what has happened with Catherine and William's visit is almost entirely, but not entirely, due to the comments that Harry and Meghan made with regard to race and the royal family in that Oprah interview. The consequences are only now emerging as extremely destructive, extremely damaging, and extremely surprising to many people, because we are now beginning to see the groundswell of racist awareness and racial awareness. Two things are somewhat different, incidentally, and I therefore draw the distinction. To the surprise and horror of people who actually wish to maintain the links with the British royal family. One person said to me, it is an unmitigated disaster. Another person said to me, unless the royal family can find a way of conveying to the public the fact that the accusations of racism leveled against at least one of them are unfounded, this is a situation that's going to remain on the boil, and that it is potentially going to result in problems with the royal family and the Commonwealth. It is turning out to be a total unmitigated horror. So no, I can't blame Prince Charles. Catherine and William were not sent as sacrificial lambs, and indeed they have conducted themselves so marvelously that several people on both sides of the political divide have made the comment that it's a pity if Jamaica, more like when Jamaica becomes a republic, because William is going to be a superb king and Catherine is going to be a superb queen. Several people have made that point. Some of whom, in fact, are in favour of a republic. So, I just say all of that for what it's worth. KY says, sadly, the Queen is too old to keep control of the standards of the royal family. The Duchess of Cambridge is acting as a sporty upper middle class head girl and not as a royal princess representing the status of our country. The attendees at the events she attends in the royal family. Can you imagine Diana, the Queen, Camilla, or the Queen Mother attending an evening event improperly dressed without a tiara or jewellery? Neither would they act as if they were on a fun student gap year. The royal family are only worthwhile if they raise the status of the country. On this tour, the Duchess did more harm than Meghan Markle. At least Meghan Markle would not have been seen sitting on the floor reading to children on television. KY, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you. Oh, Diana used to get down on her hands and knees. She's the one who started it, incidentally. And I think that Catherine Cambridge is impeccable in the way she conducts herself. I think she's absolutely flawless, not only in her conduct, but in her presentation. Now, one of my oldest and greatest friends, her son, could possibly have married Pippa. And she has always said that Catherine is a really sweet, nice, kind, obliging girl. Pippa is the one who has more personality, according to this friend of mine, who ironically enough I saw last night at the book launch. And Catherine is just a lovely person. And I've heard this from many people, but I trust the judgment of this close friend of mine because she knows the family really well. Catherine doesn't put a foot wrong. It's not about her. It's about you. She acquits herself, yes, sometimes, like an enthusiastic head girl, and what's wrong with that? I think that's all to the good. She's down to earth, she's natural, she's not pretentious, she's not stiff. The older members of the royal family used to be accused of being stiff. I think it's a good thing that they are no longer stiff. It is, believe me, a very finely tuned balancing act to be both dignified and natural at the same time, and to be both elegant and down to earth at the same time. And Catherine pulls it off brilliantly, in my not so humble and rarely rather experienced opinion, if I may be so bold as to lay down my marker. Sorry. Also, she was spectacularly gorgeous in that green dress, and the dress would not have borne a necklace. Yes, the parure does have a necklace, but elegance sometimes is leaving off something that might be unnecessary, and the neckline of the dress was such that the necklace would have dipped into the neckline. That would not have been a good look. I wear evening gowns sometimes where I don't wear necklaces. You have to know when to leave off. The earrings were absolutely spectacular. They come from the Queen and they are a part of the parure. And she did not need to wear a tiara. In fact, it would have been over-egging the pudding in the circumstances to wear a tiara, and she was quite right not to wear a tiara. Now, I'll tell you something else as well that many people don't realise. Tiaras customarily were only ever worn at white tie events. This has changed over the years. The ruling has been modified, so it's worn, you can wear a tiara sometimes at black tie events if you're a queen, etc. Well, Catherine is not the queen. She may one day be the queen, but at the moment she's 2 steps removed from the throne. Also, with the dynamics that were going on with all of the hue and cry, it would have been injudicious to wear a tiara. So I'm sorry, I can't agree with you. Linda Milligan says, and this relates to the whole business of reparations for slavery. I heard that in the 1830s, the UK paid £20 million to Jamaica. Yes, they borrowed the money, which was a vast sum. It was about £10 billion today. The government had to borrow the money to effectively buy the slaves out of slavery, because the British government understood that the rule of law requires that if you deprive a citizen of his goods, and regrettably, under slavery, the slaves were regarded as chattels. you had to compensate them. That was the legally sound and ethical way of conducting the national interest, shall we say. Otherwise, it could have caused tremendous instability. And Jamaica at the time was the most important British colony. Therefore, it did not behoove the British government to destabilize the country. They bought the freedom in reality of the slaves. That's what they did. And abolished slavery. Where is the horror? Where is the horror? Why is there room for condemnation? And also, why should people who were not enslaved be compensated for something that happened to their ancestors? And also, but we'll get to that in a second. Catherine says, I just hope that Jamaica and Barbados do not turn to China. They will make their lives a misery. Be careful what you wish for, people of the Caribbean. I'm sorry, Catherine. Oh dear, today I seem to be very contrary. Jamaica and Barbados have already turned to China. China has been buying up huge tranches of the world. And China, you see, is a very interesting acquirer of influence. They improve the infrastructure of the country. They don't care about the political system. It's all about improving the infrastructure of the country and doing business, trade, having trade with the various countries. I have to tell you, I think that is not a destructive way of going about obtaining influence. In fact, I would have said, if you examine the Chinese policy of garnering influence, it is a lot more constructive than occupying a country, which is what used to be done under the old empires, or under the American empire, bartering with influence and politically destabilizing the country with American dollars and for America's own interest to the detriment of many of the countries, because that is what American foreign policy has been throughout much of the 20th century. When it has been negative, when it has been positive, it has been wonderfully successful. But when it has been negative, it has effectively used its dollars to undermine the fabric of that country and create havoc. That is when they haven't gone to war. So I cannot say that as a student of history that I am horrified at what China is doing, because let's remember, each of these countries has a right to default with China. I mean, we've seen it with the Ukraine situation, where the states in the West are simply seizing Russian property. And not only the national property and the national investments, but private property owned by private citizens. And I have always said the flaw in China's policy is that it's buying up influence internationally, primarily for trade and for financial reasons, not to have regime change, which is a very Western thing, or a very American thing, but to keep the regimes intact and just trade, and then have those countries in the Chinese sphere of influence. However, if there's a huge problem, as has happened with Russia, where does that leave China? It has international investments all over the world. What happens when people freeze their assets? So, I think we need to consider that. Uma Bell says, Jamaica has sold itself to China. Their leaders will become very, very wealthy. The people will suffer. Same with any country that has done deals with China, like Australia and New Zealand, and someone else said, and Canada. Well, yes, politicians always know how to feather their nests. I remember John Pringle, who was the founder of Round Hill and the Deputy High Commissioner to the Court of St. James's for about 40 years. He had been the Director of Tourism as well. And I remember him telling me in 1973 about a minister in the PNP government, which had been elected in 72, who to his certain knowledge had salted away $60 million in Switzerland, all in a year. I'm afraid feathering nests often goes with the territory. But my understanding is that this Jamaican government is, as far as governments go, as uncorrupted as it is possible to be, which is a very good thing. Some of the other governments, I hate to say it, have been so corrupt. Not all of them, and not all the politicians, some have been genuinely motivated. But others, they. Oh. And on that note, I will say I am now going to interview Robert Gary Dodds. So, well, Gary, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. This is a book that Gary Dodds has written. It's about the two Alexander Hamiltons, I suppose really past and present.
Past and present, yes.
So,
yes. Although present sadly died last Easter. Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So what, can I ask, what made you decide to write it? But first of all, I suppose we should point out that the first of the Alexander Hamiltons is one of the fathers of the American nation.
Yes, the founding father.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And the second one is Alec.
Yes.
My old boyfriend Ian's elder brother.
Yeah, that's right.
You know.
Yes, I do know, but we'll say nothing.
It's and they owned the largest estate in Jamaica, didn't they?
1954, Alex was 21 years of age, left Scotland after his national service, and inherited 26,000-acre sugar plantation, Clematis Park. Quite a very good-looking man at the time, and the catch of Jamaica.
Well, one of the catches.
One of the catches of Jamaica.
There were others as well, yeah.
Tell me about them.
Well, I was too young, because remember,
yes.
Alec was much older than I am. Ian is 9 years older than I am.
Yes, he is.
And Alec was quite a bit older than Ian.
No, that's
so,
true. That's true. Yes.
But anyway, so it's a very interesting book, and tell me some of what it covers, because of course the Hamiltons are basically a Scottish stroke West Indian family.
Correct.
Because Alexander Hamilton, the founding father, or one of the founding fathers, was from Nevis, wasn't he? He was born in Nevis,
The
wasn't
founding
he?
father was born in Nevis. His father born in Scotland, son of the Laird, the Cumberbatch line of Hamiltons. Whereas Alec was born in near Glasgow, Dumbartonshire, in the first Palladium house in Scotland.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, now offices.
Well, yes, times have changed. So tell me a bit of, because it covers some really interesting ground.
Yes.
It covers, for instance, you go into slavery, which is fascinating because, of course, you couldn't have estates in the West Indies without having slaves.
I took the decision that I had to accept the elephant in the room, if you like, because Alexander Hamilton, the founding father, grew up surrounded by slavery. As a young man before America, he was involved in slave auctions. And Alexander Hamilton, the modern man, inherited an estate based on slavery. Not that it had been for 200 years, but it was there. So I had to address it.
Yes. Well, of course, the reality is that until the late 1880s, when Brazil abolished slavery, and the Russian Empire abolished serfdom in 1861, and we abolished slavery in 1833, and it kicked in 1834 to 1838. I mean, every single society on earth from the beginning of time was basically a slave society.
I tracked really 5,000 years where different African kingdoms enslaved their neighbors. And the bottom line is that was going on for 5,000 years, which shocked me. Russia ended slavery a year before America, which is interesting.
No, Russia didn't. No, it ended serfdom. Peter the Great abolished slavery.
Yes.
Russia was the first country to abolish slavery, and of course it continued, as I'm sure you address in the book about. Do tell us, for instance, about the Ottoman Empire, the number of slaves, white versus black.
Yes, it's surprising. 12 million Africans landed up being enslaved in the New World, most in the Caribbean and South America, a very small amount in comparison in North America. But the whole slavery issue comes back to the Ottoman Empire, where some 14 million white people captured along the coasts of Ireland, Spain, Yugoslavia as it used to be, were enslaved in North African countries and Middle Eastern countries, many of which didn't abolish slavery till 69 or even the 80s, whereas 12 million African slaves were taken to New World. Either is horrific. And I write in the book, I thought the easiest way to explain it was to take people on a real journey. So I researched with the naval records a particular British ship that left Bristol, and it went out through to its West African state, took on slaves, took them to the port of Saint-Lamar in southwest Jamaica, and there they were sold. And then it took its goods back to the UK, and so that triangular voyage continues. And I write in the book about the whole process from beginning to end, and the journey that the slaves were taken on, often captured hundreds of miles inland by an opposing African chief, and then sold to the coast to Europeans. And so the horrible process started.
I think, I mean, I think we're all agreed that slavery was an absolutely appalling thing, but it's
a global phenomenon at the time.
Well, it wasn't
Regardless
at the
of colour.
time.
Yes.
Yeah, but it wasn't at the
Yes.
time. It was for all times,
Yeah,
you
true.
know, until recently.
It wasn't until the 1830s, when Britain started to break it down and stop the law, that it changed. Not that that's an excuse for Britain or anybody, but slavery didn't look at colour. It looked at people. It didn't matter whether they were Chinese, Russian, white Europeans or black Africans. Slavery was colourblind. It took everybody. It's awful, but it's reality.
Now, tell us some more about what else is in the book, because I'm sure
Yes.
it's not all doom and gloom.
Oh, no.
I would imagine, because the Hamilton family is very grand,
Yes.
that there must be something rather glamorous
Yes.
to
And
recount.
I think a summary of that really is from the Duke of Hamilton very kindly wrote the foreword to my book, because of the variety of interests that he saw. Because I started writing about the modern day Alexander Hamilton, Commander's Park, and the life he led, but that led me back to, so who was the first Hamilton? And that took me back to 1185, which is not that many years beyond what he had on his family tree, which had been lost for 20 years, and I found in an unused wing of the house. But then I woke up 3 months later and said, well, if that was the first Hamilton, who were the previous Hamiltons? There weren't any. They were de Beaumonts that came from Normandy in France. And when I tracked those de Beaumonts, it took me back, using DNA and geological information, it took me back 1,142 years to the year 880. And when it was suggested in 2009 that the founding father may not have had Hamilton blood, I was able to access a DNA project in America, led by a Hamilton, that shows that the living descendants of the founding father of America carry the same gene and the same DNA found in the Viking Earl who was buried in Rouen Cathedral in France. And that cannot be unless Alexander Hamilton carried the same bloodline.
So he was a genuine Hamilton.
He was a genuine Hamilton, out of wedlock.
Was he?
Yes.
Oh, well, we won't go there.
We won't go there.
So, and I have to say,
Yes.
I loved your book launch. I thought it was very
thank you.
glam. It was very glam and very everything. But I noticed that we lost your royal guest of honour.
I know. Unfortunately, and very kind of the Duke of Kent to be our guest of honour last night. And in the afternoon, he tested positive for COVID.
So
but-
I shouldn't laugh. It's
No,
not
but
funny.
you know what was amazing? I had sent a book to be delivered to him, which I'd written to him and thanked him for being our guest of honour. And the next thing I knew, photographs were coming through of him waving the book to me, saying, I've got it, I'm going to read it. And at 10 o'clock at night, I was having dinner with the Hamilton family in the restaurant at the Polish club where the event was held. And he telephoned to apologise that he couldn't make it, that he was looking forward to reading the book. That to me was a mark of the man.
Oh, he's a very nice man. Everybody who knows
He
him
made
well
such a
says
huge effort.
he's a really decent
Yes.
man.
And then seeing all those guests, 120 people, and ambassadors and High Commissioner for Jamaica.
The Jamaican High
Yes.
Commissioner was there.
Isn't he adorable? He's
I
a lovely
absolutely
man.
love him. He's
Yeah,
so, and
Ramakan.
I love
Yes.
his wife as well, Lola. She's
She's a
divine.
doctor, yes. I didn't
She-
see her last night. though.
No, she wasn't there
No,
last night,
no.
but he was there.
He's such a charming man. Perfect ambassador.
Perfect manners.
Yes.
Perfect manners.
Yes.
Beautiful manners.
Yes.
He really is lovely.
But you
And-
know, also, you talk
Go
about
on.
you talk about the book there. I talk about Hamiltons all the way through history that impacted it. The Hamiltons that fought with Robert the Bruce and William Wallace, and the ones that fought against him. And in the whole process, I'd interviewed Baron Hamilton, who asked me a question at the end. He said, "Why is the Bermuda capital named Hamilton?" I hadn't a clue. So when I researched, I found that Henry Hamilton had been the Lieutenant Governor of Quebec for the British in the American Civil War. And during that process, he was captured and imprisoned by another future founding father of America, and then went on after a few years to become governor of Bermuda.
Really?
And then,
Who was he captured by?
Well, you have to read it in the book.
Okay. Very wise, very wise. Well, on that note, I'm going to say, Gary, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. And you can find the book, simply go to Amazon and save time, just put The Life and Times of Alexander Hamilton by Robert Gary Dodds, and you'll find it.
And we will post a picture of it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, my pleasure. If this has been of interest to you, please like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell. Please keep the questions coming in. Remember, this can't be done without you. God bless and goodbye. And thanks again, Gary.
You're most welcome.
I look forward to reading it.
Thank you.
God bless.
Bye-bye.